Hiya 12. So here is the recording that I said I would do for you, just talking through the remainder of the lesson that we didn't get to finish on Act 5. So we'll be picking up from where we left off last lesson. So looking now at lines 103 to 126. So this is the moment where Desdemona sort of temporarily revives. So I'm just going to quickly read through these lines and sort of talk you through some key points. Emilia starts, "I do beseech you that I may speak with you, O good my lord. I had forgot thee. O come in, Emilia. Soft by and by, let me draw the curtains. Where art thou?" Unlocks the door, enter Emilia. "What's the matter with thee now?" "Oh, my good lord, yonder's foul murder's done." "What, now?" "But now, my lord. It is the very error of the moon. She comes more nearer earth than she was wont, and makes men mad. Cassio, my lord, hath killed a young Venetian called Rodrigo." "Rodrigo killed, and Cassio killed?" "No, Cassio is not killed." "Not Cassio killed? Then murder's out of tune, and sweet revenge grows harsh. Oh, falsely, falsely murdered. Alas, what cry is that?" "That? What?" "Out and alas, that was my lady's voice. Help, help, ho, help! O lady, speak again. Sweet Desdemona, O sweet mistress, speak." "A guiltless death I die." "Oh, who hath done this deed?" "Nobody. I myself. Farewell, commend me to my kind lord. Oh, farewell." Dies. So the first thing that I wanted you to look at is what is it that Othello was trying to achieve just before this passage occurs. And Othello was really trying to justify his actions. We saw in the speech just previous to this, where suddenly his speech is incredibly erratic, and he demonstrates that sort of instant and immediate regret. And now obviously he is sort of beginning to feel the waves of the enormity of what he has done. So we've then obviously got an interesting use of stagecraft here, where Shakespeare has decided to sort of temporarily revive Desdemona. And so we need to think about why he has done this. Now, interestingly, she has an opportunity here, with Emilia present, to tell her what has happened to her, to sort of out Othello. And we sort of need to question, why does she, when given that opportunity, still protect Othello? Now, in terms of contributing to the overall tragedy, remember we talked yesterday about the fact that the tragedy is heightened over the fact that Desdemona is 100% innocent. This play would not have the same impact if there was any way in which we could doubt Desdemona's loyalty. And so I think here we need to consider Shakespeare trying to push that message home just one last time. She has the opportunity to out him, and she chooses to defend him. And so obviously then when we get to that moment of anagnorisis with Othello, it makes it even more painful and even more tragic for him when he realises that she has then covered for him as well. So I've kind of answered a little bit the question there on number 3. How does the audience respond to Desdemona's final words? What does this reveal about her character? So I was saying before that this just highlights again her purity, her innocence, and I suppose the audience are just sort of exasperated by this point. Desdemona can do no more to prove her innocence, and at this point she is willing to even die and let Othello sort of remain in the clear, as we should say, at the moment. And the audience, I suppose, maybe would admire her, feel that overwhelming sense of pity. But at the same time, maybe there's this real pent-up sense of frustration that even at this final opportunity when she could have laid everything out on the table, possibly even survived, she doesn't take it. But then we have to see that as an act of absolute love and loyalty to her husband at this point. So there were just a few key things I wanted to point out in this speech. Probably we've already discussed these, but I'll talk through them anyway. So just as a matter of sort of understanding the staging of this scene and references made to the staging and setting, when Othello then says, let me the curtains draw, he's obviously saying to Emilia, I'll let you in a moment, let me just draw the curtains. And obviously that's a reference to a four-poster bed, so where there would be curtains around the bed. So to a certain extent, obviously in the production at the Globe that we watched, we'd have to use imagination there. But that's what it's referring to, almost as if he wants to sort of disguise the body at this point. He wants to hide her away. So then Emilia comes in, and the moment, the tension is rife and tangible in this scene, because as we said before, Emilia sort of arrives thinking she's arrived just in the nick of time. But there's that dramatic irony, the fact that she doesn't understand that she hasn't made it in time to save Desdemona. So she says, oh my good lord, yonder's foul murder's done. There is an awful sense of irony here, because yes, murder has been done, Rodrigo has been killed, that is the news that she's coming to deliver. But obviously what she doesn't realise, there's that dramatic irony, is that she's actually saying, yes, murder's done. She's announcing that to Othello, who has just murdered Desdemona. So it's almost like Emilia doesn't understand the gravity of the words she's saying at that moment. Right. So the line, it is the very error of the moon. She comes more nearer earth than she was wont and makes men mad. So there's a couple of ways we could read into that. But firstly, it is the very error of the moon. You can see there that he is noticing that there has been a terrible mistake made. And he aligns that with nature, as if to sort of add weight to what's happened. Nature is responding, I suppose you could say, in the same way that we see it in Macbeth a little bit. How great tragedy, great disruption of the natural order is reflected in nature. And what he says here is he admitting that this makes men mad, or that he was mad to do what has just happened? There's a sense of ambiguity there that is, I suppose, a lot of it would come down to the delivery of the actor at the time, in which we would, which sort of would change how we interpret that line. Right, so we, as we said before, discussed how Othello is getting so many things wrong at this point, and Shakespeare seems set on presenting him as just being completely ignorant to what's going on around him. So Othello says Rodrigo killed and Cassio killed. So yes, Shakespeare's highlighting the errors. He's highlighting his whole misunderstanding and blindness here. So remember your aspects of tragedy. He speaks with certainty, just like he is certain his actions are justified, but he is wrong. So again, the tragedy would not be at the height it is at this moment if Othello showed any sense of doubt in what he was doing. But he doesn't. He is so sure of himself. Because if you remember in the soliloquy at the start of the scene, he calls on God to witness the good that he is doing. He is absolutely certain that his actions are justified and he is acting for the greater good. Right then, what have we got next? Ah, yes. Othello, not Cassio killed, then murders out of tune, and sweet revenge grows harsh. Right, I've highlighted that that phrase, murders out of tune, because this is not the first time we've had this metaphor of music being used here. So in Act 2, Scene 1, Iago comments that Desdemona and Othello are well tuned now. He says, oh, you are well tuned now, but I'll set down the pegs that make this music, as honest as I am. And then I'm just looking through my notes to check this, but Desdemona also, yes, Desdemona in Act 3, Scene 4 says, my advocation is not now in tune. My lord is not my lord. So this idea of something being out of tune suggests that something is undone. Something is not right. And that is why Iago sort of comments towards the start of the play saying, oh, well, you're well tuned now, as if to suggest that he is going to unravel all of that. Okay, so Desdemona temporarily revives, falsely murdered. Now, in many ways, it does seem slightly ridiculous, but it does serve that purpose that she is able to defend Othello just that one last time. So then right at the end, the way this happens on stage can determine the meaning that is delivered here. Either protecting Othello, or she says this as an acceptance that she brought this whole ordeal onto herself because she willingly married Othello. So looking at that second interpretation, it could be, in a way, her accepting and realising that the reasons Brabantio, her father, was so against this marriage, this union, was because marrying an older black man was always going to be problematic, and this is sort of her thinking, actually, he was right, I have willingly taken this on, therefore there is no one to blame but myself. That's one way we could look at it. Or she is protecting Othello that one last time. Okay, so I'm going to look now at this section, lines 127 to 166. So for the purpose of sort of recording this myself, rather than you being with me, I will just sort of work my way through that scene, pulling out key things that you should know. So I will probably be answering these questions that are on the board as well, but if I've missed anything in particular, I can sort of readdress those at the end. So we're looking now at the moment after she dies, and then straight away Othello begins. Why? How should she be murdered? Now at this point the audience are just going to be in absolute disbelief that he is now not owning what he has done. And Emilia says, alas, who knows? And I think the audience, I personally would feel some real anger and bitterness towards Othello, in the sense that his wife, who he just killed, took her last moments to, depending on interpretation, defend him, yet then does not own it. He allows her to die, basically covering for him. You heard her say herself, it was not I. So he seems to go into this sort of denial. Is he panicking here? It was not I, as if to suggest he thinks that someone might consider blaming him. Maybe a guilty conscience talking there. Now, interestingly, Othello then, in the following line that he says, she's like a liar gone to burning hell, 'twas I that killed her. So it seems a bit strange, because in just the line before, he says, no, it wasn't me, but then openly admits that it was him. So she was defending him. He now takes ownership of it all. And this, I suppose, is the start of where we see for question 5 this religious imagery, burning hell. Therefore, he is absolutely of the belief that she is deserving of hell. Her soul is tainted because of her sins that she did not. She did not repent. She did not confess to those before she died, even though there was nothing to confess. He is very much of the understanding that she is deserving of hell because of her adultery. So then this imagery continues with Emilia. She says, "Oh, the more angel she oh, the more angel she, and you the blacker devil." So we've got here this contrast, and she is highlighting the absolute disparity in their, I suppose, in their personalities at this point. She is just angelic. She is pure. She was doing everything right, and she is basically telling him that it is you that is the devil. Now, throughout this whole section, Emilia completely steps out of her role as sort of being silenced by men. She takes up her place to challenge Othello, and so the audience, I think, are really much are really rooting for Emilia and it massively in support of her at this point, because she is overstepping her boundaries possibly at this point, if we're looking at this in the context of the patriarchy. However, the audience would have been willing for this to happen anyway, because we've seen from earlier in the play, she is a woman that is much more outspoken. She has more worldly wise opinions, and therefore we wanted this whole time for her to finally voice those. So this is a really powerful moment, but also very satisfying for the audience. So obviously we've got Emilia telling him he's the devil, but also the blacker devil. I suppose you can't help ignore the adjective blacker, as if to reference his race possibly. Obviously we can read into that what we like, but there has been throughout obviously this inherent racism. Okay, she turned to folly and she was a whore. So Othello is really trying to continue justifying his actions at this point. Thou dost belie her and thou art a devil. Okay, so belie just meaning to tell lies about her. So she's throwing the accusations back now, but she is the one that is spot on. She was as false as water. So this is an interesting simile here. I guess we can understand him to be saying here that water is sort of you can't contain it. It runs everywhere, untrustworthy because water might move under any sort of influence. And so we've got this water versus fire imagery and between Emilia and Othello. So I think Shakespeare here is trying to highlight sort of the rivalry between them by using imagery of opposites. So we've got the devil and angel, heaven and hell, we've now got fire and water. And so in response to this, he then says, thou art rash as fire, to say that she were false. Oh, she was heavenly true. So she's basically calling completely mad, because fire is just uncontrollable, spreads uncontrollably, but also suggests or hints at the heat of his fury as well. Okay, Cassio did top her, ask thy husband else. Oh, I were damned beneath all depth in hell, but that I did proceed upon just grounds to this extremity. Thy husband knew it all. Right, he again is trying to reinforce here that he was justified. I proceed upon just grounds to this extremity. Now, the fact that he says this extremity, the noun extremity here, suggests that he knows his actions are extreme. And so, when he is later to find out that it wasn't justified, he is going to be overcome with absolute terror, I suppose, at his own actions. But this is when Iago sort of seeps in through their conversation and things start to unravel. Ask thy husband knew it all. So all of these questions and references to the husband is starting to build tension leading up to that moment of anagnorisis, because we see the cogs turning for Othello as they begin here, and it all starts to slip into place. My husband, thy husband. That she was false to wedlock, I with Cassio. Nay, she had been true if heaven would make me such another world of one entire and perfect chrysolite, I'd have not sold her for it. So he's kind of saying here, you know, if she was faithful, I wouldn't give up. If heaven would make me such another she was faithful. Oh, sorry, I'm misreading my own writing. If she was faithful, I wouldn't give up her for any jewel from heaven. So he's saying, you know, if I was wrong, if I had any reason to believe that she was pure, I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't give her up. And so the dramatic irony here is just rife. Because the audience knows Emilia and Othello both together are about to unravel and realise themselves who actually was responsible for allowing him to believe this. So then we've got my husband, 'twas he, and then he says, an honest man he is. This repetition of honest man, it's just, as an audience member, it's painful to listen to. Then we have again, my husband. So this repetition of questions, she's in disbelief here. She can't understand really what Iago would have to do with this at all. O mistress, villainy hath made mocks with love. My husband say that she were false. And he says, I say thy husband. So he has to keep reinforcing it. My friend, thy husband, honest, honest Iago. At this point, Shakespeare is just, he's just having fun, I think, with the building of that dramatic irony to heighten that tension. So Emilia now really sort of steps up and completely lets rip on Othello. If he say so, may his pernicious soul rot half a grain a day. So she's recognising now the villainy in her husband. He lies to the heart. She was too fond of her most filthy bargain. This is a real insult now to Othello, because he's saying there is no way she would have done this because she basically loved you too much. But she calls him a filthy bargain as if to suggest she loves him so much, but you were not worth it. Right, so Emilia then says, do thy worst. She sort of invites him to try and justify again, to go back at her. She says, this deed of thine is no worthy heaven than thou wast worthy of her. So she's saying, killing me won't send you to heaven. You weren't good enough for her. So she's almost inviting him to almost attack her, do whatever it is he's thinking he needs to do to her at this moment. And we are so admiring of Emilia right now. She is incredibly brave. Maybe we are concerned for Emilia's safety at this point, but I also think the audience can see kind of where this is about to go. And so I think rather than being concerned for her, we are celebrating her, and we are just in absolute awe of her at this moment. We just wished it had come sooner. He says, peace you were best, so shut up. Thou hast not half the power to do me harm as I have to be hurt. So she's saying here, I can endure far more than you can inflict upon me. So she is a strong woman. She's incredible at this point. And she throws the insults at him now. So she really is overstepping that boundary of what I suppose would have been acceptable to men as behaviour from her. Oh gull, oh dolt. So these are all insults. You fool, you idiot. You're as ignorant as dirt. And then thou hast done a deed I care not for thy sword. I'll make thee known, though I lost 20 lives. Okay, so she's basically saying, I will get you for this. And then she starts screaming down, and then Montano, Grantiano, Iago, and others arrive. Okay, so skipping ahead to sort of lines 250 onwards, then we have Othello speaking here. Now I'm just going to pause, well, you pause me, just while you read over this, and then I'll talk through the main points based on the questions. So just before this moment, just to sort of fill in the gap here, Iago's undoing has occurred. Emilia has outed him, and in true Iago style, he stabs Emilia, and the stage direction says from behind. Again, it is the epitome of Iago's underhand, sly nature. Okay, so then we're at the point now where Othello, he knows what's happening now. So he says, "Behold, I have a weapon. A better never did itself sustain upon a soldier's thigh. I have seen the day that with this little arm and this good sword I have made my way through more impediments than 20 times your stop. But oh, vain boast, who can control this fate? 'Tis not so now. Be not afraid, though you do see me weaponed. Here is my journey's end. Here is my butt, and very sea mark of my utmost sail. Do you go back dismayed? 'Tis a lost fear. Man but a rush against Othello's breast, and he retires. Where should Othello go? Now, how dost thou look now? O ill-starred wench, pale as thy smock, when we shall meet at Compt, this look of thine will hurl my soul from heaven, and fiends will snatch at it. Cold, cold, my girl, even like thy chastity, O cursed slave. Whip me, ye devils, from the possession of this heavenly sight. Blow me about in winds, roast me in sulphur, wash me in deep down gulfs of liquid fire. O Desdemona, Desdemona, dead. Oh, oh, oh. Now, again, my performance is shoddy. I apologise, but just to give you the overall picture of what he's saying there. So we've kind of talked a little bit about how we are supposed to take Othello at this point. Now, you know, I'm not Othello's fan. I don't particularly feel any pity or sympathy for him here. But he is presented as being sort of deeply sad, deeply wounded by the unravelling of information. And he sounds like he's giving his own eulogy. Now he thinks and speaks about himself a lot here in the third person. Now he has done this before previously, but it's particularly pertinent here. Almost as if he is suddenly dislocated from himself. He is having possibly what you might describe as sort of an out-of-body experience, where he feels like he isn't present. He can't understand his surroundings. He doesn't understand his place in this situation anymore. So when he says, "I have a weapon," there is that tension, because he is making it known that he has a sword on him. He is potentially going to kill someone or kill himself. So that hint is sort of there, having that underlying tension just bubbling away. And he's sort of using it as a reminder of how great he once was. He talks about, you know, soldiers, reminds himself of the great, mighty warrior that he was. And it's ironic now that this will be what ends him. So there's lots of questions here, lots of questions. Highlighting, I suppose, how everything to him now is just needing to be called into question. Everything he thought he knew, everything he thought he understood, even everything he thought he knew about his friends, all of it has just unravelled in front of him. He can't place himself anymore. Everything has gone awry for him. There's also this possible tone of arrogance here as well, and this is what I'm just not a fan of. But you know, the way he talks almost makes it sound as if he didn't know what people would expect him to do in his situation. You know, do you go back dismayed? He's asking all these questions as if to suggest, well, what else could I have done? And so I think for me, this is still evidence that yes, he's in this moment of anagnorisis where he notices, he realizes the error, but he still doesn't know what else he could have done about it. And then we have all this reminder of heaven and hell, and basically a reminder of the ultimate price that he is going to pay for what he has done. So we've got lots of hyperbolic phrases, oh cursed slaves, and then lots of imperatives, basically demanding hell to punish him as harshly as possible. Whip me, ye devils, blow me about in winds, roast me in sulphur, wash me down. Now I suppose you could look at this, especially with the exclamation marks, sort of heightening that emotion as him wishing upon himself the worst possible punishment, which is all very well. That's absolutely probably what you would say he deserves, but it also doesn't bring back an innocent woman who did nothing, basically. So his response here to seeing Desdemona's body, those last two lines, is very melodramatic, moment of real high tension, and his language is evoking that sense of catharsis, that pity and terror combined at the same time. Now it's really interesting that he only wounds Iago rather than actually killing him. Now what's annoying here is that he chooses to wound Iago, who is responsible for all of this, yet kills Desdemona, who is responsible for none of this. She's done nothing. So that's just another reason why I think Othello is just completely daft here. So my thoughts on him, my thoughts on why he maybe does this is because by killing him, he's almost granting him that peace of death. It's over then. It's possible that he wants him to suffer, wants him to feel pain. And at this point, the audience are desperate to see some sense of justice served at this moment. But Iago, basically refusing to speak at the very end of the play, doesn't allow us to have that. So it's almost like the grand finale of his villainy, that when caught out he still will not offer any kind of explanation, and we're given throughout the play multiple possible motives for the reason why he's doing what he's doing, and so we're never really given a solid reason that we can hinge all of his actions on. So that's really unsettling, and it sort of doesn't bring the play to a nice, comfortable conclusion, because that sense of justice is missing. And then finally, I just want to draw your attention to that question in yellow. What's interesting about ways in which Othello presents himself here? My personal view on this is that he is still presenting himself as victim, or so it would seem. He's basically positioning himself as someone who was only doing what had to be done with the information he had. And so he's kind of not taking ownership of the fact that he was led to believe all of this. His credulous nature isn't called into question here. He does not want to be he does not want to see that he was in the wrong because of his own fatal flaw. And so yes, there's anagnorisis, but what I'm not seeing from him here is a realization that it was a flaw in himself that also allowed this to happen. He very much puts it all on Iago, and yes, Iago was absolutely highly responsible for everything that happened, but he won't accept, or doesn't seem to accept, responsibility for his own flaws here. As before then, I've just put up the bit of speech and jotted down other notes that I think are worth mentioning. So to begin with, he says, "Behold, I have a weapon." So raises dramatic stakes here. We know death is inevitable, but not yet how it should occur. So we know some death is coming, but as I've said, we don't know whose death, and we don't yet necessarily know how or why it's coming, but Shakespeare's keen to make us aware of the potential for it anyway. And he then says, with this little arm and this good sword. Those adjectives You know, they're not phrases or words we would associate with a brave like soldier like Othello, especially when we hear about his stories previously. So in a way, we see that he is diminished. He talks about himself in a diminished manner, this little arm. Yeah, he's really talking down, sort of self-deprecatingly now, which absolutely is right that he's doing that. But we see that his own opinion of himself has shrunk slightly. Right, who can control his fate? So his fate, here is a time when he's talking about himself in that third person. But we've got this sense of fate and destiny contributing to this overwhelming sense of inevitability. So the aspect of tragedy here, inevitability, we know it's coming. He is claiming here, though, that no man can control the preordained life that will happen for him. So in a way, as I've said before, it doesn't feel like he's actually still taking any ownership for himself here. He's almost sort of putting it back onto fate, as if to say, you know, this was destined to happen. What could I have done to control this? So he's still relinquishing some sense of responsibility here. And he says, here is my journey's end. So this image is particularly poignant. By reverting back to the noble imagery associated with him in Act 1, the hero is able to raise himself up again to the audience. He needs to be the tragic hero, not a villain. So he sees himself now as coming to the end, whether that is his life. We obviously assume it is, but it's not being made particularly clear here. But this is important because, remember, his death won't serve the tragedy in the way it should if we don't consider him the tragic hero and instead see him in any way as being villainous. So we do still need to remember that sort of sense of nobility that was once associated with him earlier. So man but a rush against Othello's breast and he retires. Where should Othello go now? So third person references to himself. He's got that sense of dislocation. He's distanced. Maybe doesn't recognise himself now. He cannot associate with this version of himself. And then there is a moment here where even I'm thinking, do we like him for this? The fact that he now cannot associate with the former version of himself, is that a recognition that that version of himself is flawed? There's been no real acknowledgement of that, but could this be an implicit way of him recognising that his sort of former self, in inverted commas, is flawed? So we've then got another reference to fate. Oh, ill-starred wench. So he's sort of using a real hyperbolic phrase here, talking about Desdemona, but again he's using fate to justify what happened, or at least it seems that way. Ill-starred, as if to suggest, you know, bad fortune. She was always going to have bad fortune. So again, it's very difficult because this sort of eulogy, there are moments where I think, oh, actually, no, he is trying to remove himself from the version of himself that he has become. But then there are other moments where he also then seems to try and pass off any responsibility. So this look of thine will hurl my soul from heaven and fiends will snatch at it. So I've put here, he can at least acknowledge that that she will go to heaven and he will go to hell. And, you know, the use of the verb hurl suggests that he will literally be launched straight into hell. And that she will go to heaven. So he's done like a complete 180 on what he was saying literally just earlier in this scene where he was talking about her being damned to hell. It says, whip me, ye devils. So this whole section here where he's commanding the devils to do their worst, he's crying out for punishment. Shakespeare wants to redeem Othello here by making him want to be punished. So again, at this moment, at least we can see that he acknowledges that he deserves it. He's at least sort of owning up to that. And this is Shakespeare sort of trying to ensure that we do still see him as that tragic hero right at the very end. And then we've got all these people coming in. And so remember we talked about when Desdemona's in her bed, this sort of private realm becoming a public sphere. And again, it's all becoming very public here with the entrance of these characters. Othello then says, "That's he that was Othello, here I am." So still in the third person, still very detached, but he seems to be speaking as if he's a bit of a shell of a man, almost like his soul is now dead. Everything he once knew about himself just doesn't exist anymore. And then he says, "Where is that viper? Bring the villain forth." So we've got this sort of snake serpent reference, biblical reference, referencing the devil here. And it's finally very satisfying to see that he is finally being called what he is. He's been so used to hearing himself called honest Iago constantly, that for the first time someone is calling him out for what he actually is. And then Iago says right at the end, "I bleed, sir, but not killed." Now, this is just infuriating, because he sounds like he's gloating, as if to say, "You haven't finished me off." So again, we just see Iago now for the absolute villain that he is. So I mentioned with the previous speech that he's almost creating like a eulogy for himself. That was my mistake. He does do that, but not there. He does it here. So this final speech that he gives, he says, "Soft you, a word or two before you go. I have done the state some service, and they know it. No more of that. I pray you, in your letters, when you shall these unlucky deeds relate, speak of me as I am, nothing extenuate, nor set down aught in malice. Then must you speak of one that loved not wisely, but too well, of one not easily jealous, but being wrought perplexed in the extreme, of one whose hand, like the base Indian, threw a pearl away richer than all his tribe, of one whose subdued eyes, albeit unused for the melting mood, dropped tears as fast as the Arabian trees, their medicinal gum. Set you down this, and say besides that in Aleppo once, where a malignant and turbaned Turk beat a Venetian and traduced the state, I took by the throat the circumcised dog and smote him thus." So first, just a bit about this idea of a eulogy. So a eulogy is given at funerals. It's how people are remembered, and someone's sort of telling the tale of this person. And we've talked a bit about power being in those that are who are able to control the narrative. For most of the time, Othello has not been in control of his narrative, although he thinks he is. Iago's being very manipulative in making him believe he had that power, but he didn't. And so now he is taking back that control. He is ensuring that he is the one to set the story up for how he will be remembered. And so again, you can look at this and think, is this him just taking back what was taken from him from Iago, or is this being self-serving? See it how you want. But let's just look at what he says then. So, "I have done the state some service, and they know it." So his value here is clearly not intrinsic like Brabantio's, for example, because of his race, his otherness. He has had to earn his worth, and he is reminding them of that. He's reminding them that he is worthy. So I suppose that's quite sad in a way, because he is a great soldier, and people valued him for his work, but he has to remind people of that now. It's not like him having the same role but being a white Venetian, where it would just be understood. His value would just be understood. So I pray in your letters. So this is referring here to the letters found of Rodrigo. So very convenient plot device here to sort of tie loose ends together here. And then he says that these unlucky deeds. Now, I definitely would not refer to the unfolding of the events in this play as unlucky deeds. Again, the adjective unlucky is again a suggestion of fate, maybe. Is he brushing off his actions again as just an act of fate? And he says here, speak of me as I am, nothing extenuate, nor set down aught in malice. So he's saying, remember me as I was. Don't over embellish me, but also don't try and be cruel in the way you remember me. So he's hoping here that he will be remembered for the person he was at the very beginning of the play. So he then says, you must speak of one that loved not wisely but too well. Now, this line just seems utterly ridiculous, especially, well, to me in particular, that he would believe he wouldn't have killed her if he loved her less. He's saying here that, oh, I just loved her too much, as if that's some kind of justification for his actions. But this actually rings true for a modern audience about domestic abuse. You know, it's a common sort of thing that, oh, I just loved her too much, or him even, you know, it works both ways. They were acting purely out of love, which does seem just totally bizarre. The moment will be taken differently depending on a different audience. Either way, though, it doesn't seem to be something that's taken well, I would assume. So he uses his actions of ridding the world of Desdemona with the simile of like the base Indian who threw a pearl away richer than all his tribe. So he does describe his actions here as being like throwing away something of the highest value that he, you know, well, yeah, he just threw something away of absolute utmost value. And so here it highlights that he knew the value of what he had, and so that makes the loss even greater. He understands the purity, the angelicness, if that's a word, of Desdemona, and he has to now live with those consequences. And so that final chunk in pink, we are reminded here about his exotic nature, but also reminded about how he has acted in the past to defend the state. So he's really trying to remind people of his value. He doesn't want to be remembered solely for what has just happened, even though that seems like a ridiculous ask when what you've done is just murdered a completely innocent woman. The speech immediately precedes his own suicide, as if to suggest he too is now an enemy of the state that needs to be rid of. It's a very private moment, but the language used is very public. Okay, and then he kills himself, and he says, "I kissed the air, I killed thee. No way but this, killing myself to die upon a kiss." So his final words are to Desdemona, a really private moment. But can you believe he deserves to kiss her now like this? Again, he seems to just be concerned with getting his last moment with her. He doesn't apologise either. You know, he thinks he can kiss her, but he can't then apologise. So it's a very intimate moment again, but still shared in that public sphere and on the bed, which is the most private and intimate place, but it is laid bare for all to see at this point. So on the remaining slides then, these are just some tasks to kind of get you working on this ending, because with tragedies, with the poetry, with the plays, with, you know, any text that you're given that is tragic, it's really vital that you are able to discuss, at least in good detail, the opening and the endings. Those in particular are highly important because they begin and end the tragic journey. So this slide then, you have the phrase, Shakespeare allows Othello to redeem himself at the end of the play. How far do you agree with this idea? So you're ultimately being asked to consider, is his suicide cowardly, or does it restore him to that hero status? So I've just given you some pointers of things to think about. His interactions with Cassio and the Venetians, his attitudes towards Iago, his closing soliloquy, so how does he present himself in this final line? How might an audience respond? How other characters are now responding to him, and then a range of possible responses to the demise of this character. So I'm looking particularly at the lines 287 to 367 for that moment. And then here is just some other statements that you can have a practice with to prepare you for like a section B style task. So order is restored at the end of the play. To what extent do you agree? So you could talk a little bit about here whether you think justice is served, whether you think order is restored, or is it necessary that those things happen? You know, does order need to be restored at the end of the play? Something possibly to discuss. Othello dies a tragic hero, not a villain. Again, quite similar to the one you've just seen. To what extent do you agree? Emilia is the true hero of the play. That's a fantastic question for some sort of alternative study focusing mainly on the women here. She's a fantastic character. And then finally, the play fails to condemn the misogyny at the heart of the villainy. So this is interesting because it's proposing that all of the villainy in this play stems from misogyny. Now, obviously, with it being a patriarchy, this is sort of embedded in society, but again, something interesting to look at for some revision. So that is all that I have to cover in these remaining slides of the lesson we started on Tuesday. Now, if you have any questions, if you want me to go over anything again, please email me and I can arrange a time to catch up with you. Thanks, Year 12, and best of luck in your exam.